All right. Okay, let's get started. Let's get started for the afternoon. Welcome to Shiloh National Military Park. My name is Bjorn Skaptason. I am a volunteer here at the park, and it is a pleasure to see everybody here this afternoon. And as you can see, it's going to be a moist afternoon at Shiloh, and it's a perfect day to try to find some of the classier mud holes in Bjorn National Park. And I'm intent on trying to help you find those so that you can interpret those mud holes historically. On the serious side, yes, we are still going to go down in the ravines, and we are still going to cross the creeks if we can safely do so. We will make judgments about that sometimes when we get to those locations. Another thing that could call us off would be lightning. If we get lightning that we feel like we don't want to deal with, we might call it off. If there's lightning and thunder and this radio here goes off and the visitor center calls and says, Bjorn, bring him back in, then we got to go back in. But until then, expect to get wet. I don't think the heavy stuff is coming for an hour or more. The program we're going to do this afternoon is called The Left Flank, the Neglected Flank. And the reason we're going to talk about that is I have a bit of a soft spot for stories and analysis of parts of battles that are normally unseen. Generally speaking, if I read something about a battle and the author seems to infer, well, nothing happened over there, that's the place I want to learn about. And so we are going to go spending the rest of our afternoon where nothing happened. We're going to find the places where nothing happened. Thousands of people, 110,000 people came to this battlefield to fight a decisive battle of the Civil War over 2 days. And I assure you, there's not a square inch of this 4,000 whatever acre park where nothing happened. It's just a matter of whether we wish to learn what happened and what happened means. And so we're going to tease some of that out this afternoon when we look at the Confederate left flank. Now, why is the Confederate left flank neglected by some historians? By that I mean the left flank of the Confederate Army on the first day of the battle, more easily described as the west side of the battlefield, the west flank. Why is it neglected? And the reason is going to be the first thing you need to know about the battle. The first thing anybody needs to know when they approach the strategy and tactics of the Battle of Shiloh. The Confederate plan, as given to the commanders by General Albert Sidney Johnston, was we will turn the left flank of the enemy, drive them away from the river and into the swamps north and west of Pittsburgh Landing, where he will be compelled to surrender. That's a paraphrase of Albert Sidney Johnston, but that's about what he said. We will turn the left flank of the enemy. Turn the left flank of the Union line. That means the fighting, if the Confederates succeed in their plan, will happen on the east side of the battlefield. The Confederates will turn the left flank, the east flank of the Union Army, and drive them into the swamps, where they will be compelled to surrender. Now, that is not necessarily the way the battle worked out in the morning. As we've seen, if we've been on some of the morning hikes, the Confederates did not attack initially the left flank of the Union Army. They initially attacked the center and even the left center of the Union Army before they made adjustments to try to get around the left flank. So enormous amounts of fighting happened in the first Union camps, the General Sherman's camp or General Prentice's camp. Very bloody fighting happened there. Once those camps were taken, many of the Confederate leaders, including General Johnston, I think, thought they had successfully turned the left flank of the enemy, and then they pivoted too early and started attacking to the north and to the west. And all of that interfered with their main objective of turning the left flank of the enemy. However, by the afternoon of April 6th, by about the time we're here now, 2 o'clock or so, the left flank of the Union Army was being pressed very heavily by heavy formations of the Confederate Army over there in the Peach Orchard area. About this time, over there on the east side of the battlefield, General Johnston was bleeding his last, having been wounded in the leg there in the area of the Peach Orchard. By that time, Confederates knew that they needed to get their force to the east side of the battlefield, or failing that, pursue retreating Federals in an easterly direction. That would leave the west side of the battlefield with considerably less Confederate presence and considerably mixed Confederate presence. Now, who was in charge over here? Well, when the battle began, General Johnston had 4 corps commanders. He had 4 corps: 1st, 2nd Corps, 1st Corps, 2nd Corps, 3rd Corps, Reserve Corps. General Leonidas Polk was the 1st Corps commander. General Braxton Bragg was the 2nd Corps commander. General Joseph Hardee was the 3rd Corps commander, and General John Breckinridge was the Reserve Corps commander. However, during the confusion of the morning battle, when some of those Confederate generals thought they had turned the left flank of the Union Army and started attacking to the north and to the west, and brigades became separated from divisions, and divisions came separated from corps, and regiments became separated from their brigades. During that time, the Confederate Corps commanders, along with General Johnston, by agreement, gave up their planned mission. They gave up their planned responsibilities of commanding corps, and they agreed to divide the battlefield by geography. So instead of Polk commanding the 1st Corps, which is spread all over the place, and Bragg commanding the 2nd Corps, which is spread all over the place, Polk would take the middle. Bragg would take the right center. Breckinridge and Johnson are over on the right, the east, and 3rd Corps commander, William Joseph Hardee, took command of the Confederate left. He took command of everything from the left center of the battlefield all the way to the left. And in so doing, William Joseph Hardee, Major General, without any previous plan and without any previous force assigned to this mission, received the mission twofold. Received the mission of connecting whatever force he had to whoever was on his right, connecting with the rest of the Confederate Army on his right, while at the same time connecting his left to Owl Creek. Owl Creek is the water course over here underneath those bluffs over there. And that defines the left flank of the battle. That defines the western flank of the battle. And in order to prevent any enemies getting around the flank of the Confederate Army and ruining the plan and beating the Confederate Army, General Hardee had to keep touch with Owl Creek and any Federals that might want to get through there, while at the same time, on the right, keep in touch with the rest of the Army. He had to do all of this with a very small force. A very small force. In fact, it's going to amount to 1 infantry brigade, a few battalions of cavalry, and a few batteries of artillery that come and go. So this is quite a conundrum. This is quite a conundrum for General Hardee. He had to try to guard a large geographic area with a very small force, and the force was of a very mixed character. Didn't have a lot of anything. Didn't have enough infantry to do heavy fighting, didn't have enough cavalry to do good screening, didn't have enough artillery to properly prepare for any attack or defense. But whatever he had He had to accomplish the mission with that. That's the life he signed up for when he became a general in the Confederate Army. William Hardee. We don't have a whole lot of time out here in the rain for a real deep biography, but this is a guy with a long pedigree in the U.S. Army, graduate of West Point, native of the state of Georgia. Most well known for translating and distilling some European tactical manuals into the most commonly used training manual for militia and also the regular army, called Hardee's Tactics. It's the book that a lot of these guys use to learn how to become soldiers. So he's the author of Hardee's Tactics. A fine general. He followed his native state of Georgia into secession, became a major brigadier general, then a major general in the Confederate Army, commanded some troops in Arkansas, commanded some troops at Bowling Green in Kentucky under the direct supervision of Albert Sidney Johnston. And then with Johnston and the rest of that army, Hardee retreated from Bowling Green, Kentucky, through Nashville to Chattanooga, ultimately to Corinth, where he participated in this attack, commanding the 3rd Corps of the Confederate Army. That gets General Hardee to the battlefield. Now let's get started moving. As we move, I will introduce you to the assets that General Hardee has at his disposal to try to fulfill this 2-part mission. 1, to keep connection with Owl Creek and prevent any enemy forces from getting around the Confederate left flank, while at the same time connecting to the forces that are on his right. Ready to go? Well, we're going.
We're heading west in Jones's Field. Coming along behind, this side is better. This side is better. We got lots of thorns over here, so take this side of the mud puddle. There's the picnic area. All right, we'll make a This is our first nod to expediency we are going to take today. I had planned on going down through that hole on the other side of the highway because there's a tablet up there. But I promise you there will be other holes today, even deeper and wetter than that one. But we are going to make sure that we get a chance to talk about anything we want to talk about. We're going to cut a corner here and talk about what happened over in that direction. On the other hand, this is a good place to talk about it because we have an excellent view of terrain that will illustrate the problem that General Hardee had to deal with and the amount of terrain he had to cover with his small force. You see here, this is area right across the road. It's the Shiloh picnic area. It's called Sowell Field. Sowell Field. And that is a narrow nose of terrain that sticks straight out toward Owl Creek. That's the last high ground toward Owl Creek. The Matt Ravine over there, and this feeder right here, right across the way, they go straight down and the water flows straight into Owl Creek. But Owl Creek would be just below the end of that field. And then actually a few hundred more feet of bottom land before you actually get to the channel of the creek. But on a day like today, on a day like it was April 5th or April 7th, 1862, that bottom land would be full. It would be full of mud, and it would be a swampy area. So it would be very unlikely that anybody could go around to the bottom land. Nevertheless, Hardee really has to think about being able to cover all the way, at least down there, if he is going to command the west flank of the battlefield. And with whatever amount of force he has. Now, let's meet one of the formations that General Hardee had at his command. When Fort Henry fell to General Grant's army in February of 1863, set off alarm bells throughout the Confederacy. Set off alarm bells throughout the Confederacy. The Confederacy had a grand strategy of trying to protect all of their terrain. So they had a line all the way across Kentucky from the Appalachians to the Mississippi River. They had big garrisons in New Orleans and Mobile and Pensacola, all along the Gulf Coast. They had a few forces in the interior. They had some forces in Arkansas. They tried to protect as much ground as they could. After the fall of Fort Henry, it became absolutely clear that these Confederate armies had to concentrate into a single strong striking force that some Confederate general could use to fight and win a decisive battle against Union armies. So, through February, March of 1862, all of these outlying forces were brought together and concentrated at Corinth, Mississippi. Some forces were left in each of these places, but by and large, these places were stripped of their defenses. New Orleans, the largest and most important city in the Confederacy, was largely stripped of its infantry to defend it. And those infantry came up here, up to Corinth, to become part of this army. And the one infantry brigade that Hardee had at his disposal that afternoon is a brigade largely of Louisiana infantry, but also some Tennessee troops under the command of Louisiana Colonel Preston Pond. Preston Pond's brigade. Now, from the beginning of the battle, it had fallen to Preston Pond and his brigade to take the first of those two missions that Hardee had to perform on the afternoon. It had fallen to Pond and the Louisiana Brigade to keep connection with Owl Creek, to watch Owl Creek. The first thing they had to do
was when they crossed the Hamburg-Purdy Road a mile down here. There's a very important bridge. It's a very important bridge that leads west on the Hamburg-Purdy Road toward Purdy. And if there were any Federals across that bridge that might sneak in across Owl Creek and attack them in the rear, attack the Confederates in the rear, that's where they do it. So when the Confederate Army moved across the Hamburg-Purdy Road, drove the Federals across Hamburg-Purdy Road, they had to leave behind a battery of artillery and 2 regiments of infantry to protect the Owl Creek Bridge. And those were detached from Pond's brigade, from Preston Pond's brigade. So immediately that brigade became a little bit smaller because leaving detachments behind.
Who were the 2 brigades?
The 2 regiments, the Crescent Regiment and 38th Tennessee, I think. The Crescent Regiment, definitely. And then part of Ketchum's artillery battery, but they're going to catch up later. So during the morning, because Pond is very conscious of what's happening on his left and that he has to remain as far west as possible on the battlefield, Pond's brigade is very lightly engaged. Most of the heavy fighting happens, more toward the center of the battlefield. And the Union troops that are immediately in front of Pond generally give back pretty easily when he advances. However, these men have to advance across the worst terrain on the battlefield. Every one of these ridges is just like these, all the way up and all the way down, all the way up and all the way down. Right in the middle of the line and up the steep slope to the top of the ridge. By the time about 2 o'clock arrives in the afternoon, the Confederates have broken the first 2 Union positions by 2 o'clock. The Federals, under Sherman and McClernand on the west side of the battlefield, General Sherman and General McClernand have launched a counterattack that have driven the Confederates back almost as far as Shiloh Church. The Confederates have recovered from that counterattack and then pushed General Sherman and General McClernand back down this same terrain until they're in this area, in the field we were just passing through. It's called Jones Field. By that time, General Pond had moved his brigade up to that second high ground. There's a tablet over there, and we're not going to go look at it. But he had moved his brigade up there, and from there, Confederate infantry was attached to his right, and then more to his right. So there was a Confederate battle line over there by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. However, General Sherman and General McClernand began retreating to the east and the north. Not straight north, not toward the Owl Creek, not into the bottoms, but to the east and the north. So one by one, those Confederate brigades that are connected to Pond's right begin peeling off and moving to the right. Now Pond and his Louisiana brigade, we're going to meet them later, but their next move, after the Confederates start moving forward again, is to cross that ravine, come up here. They engage lightly, it says, lightly engage retreating Federals in the Jones Field area, and then the Federals retreat from in front of them. So by between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, Pond and his brigade would be on this ground moving forward toward the Jones Field position. All right? Let's head back up the way we came.
nothing to do with them today. Yep. Oh.
We're heading south from Jones Field.
We've reached a position that is more or less east from the tablet that we did not visit, right? We just didn't cross the road and we didn't go down through the ravine. We came back and we came here and we went east. And like I said, the federal forces that had counterattacked and driven the Confederates back and then had been counterattacked themselves and driven back to this position began to retreat to the east, to the north, some, and then to the east. General Sherman and General McClernand at first made a perimeter around the Jones Field, the large field that we met in, and defended that. And then finally, when they could no longer defend that position, they fell back toward the east. Now, what happened in the Confederate line of battle is that very naturally the Confederates that were attacking and driving the Union forces back to the east pursued them to the east, meaning that all of the force that is on the west side of the battlefield, on the west flank of the battlefield, all that force, especially the infantry formation, began moving toward the east. And again, they began pursuing toward the center of the battlefield, which is the Hornet's Nest area, where those Union forces in the center of the battlefield were holding out. This is a good tablet to illustrate for us what was going on. This is the 22nd Tennessee and the 11th Louisiana Regiments. They're Russell's 1st Brigade of Clark's 1st Division of Polk's 1st Corps. And 22nd Tennessee and part of the 11th Louisiana were engaged here about 2:30 p.m. And then they moved up the valley of Tillman Creek, meaning it's going to be more or less south, once they're in the valley of Tillman Creek. South and then east, up the valley to the place of Prentice's surrender. So these regiments, which are on the left side of the battlefield and available to General Hardee by pursuing the enemy that was in front of them that they were driving, went down into Tillman Branch, bore to the south and the east, and eventually came up in the rear of the Hornet's Nest and helped capture those men. That left, that kind of movement leaves a big hole in the Confederate line as the Confederates begin to sweep around and go that way. And General Hardee, who has this dual mission of connecting to Owl Creek and also to the rest of the Army, has that much more trouble. And in fact, these two units, as well as the units on their right, which would have been Patrick Cleburne's brigade, which there's a tablet down here for them, as they move to the east and then ultimately to the southeast, they are removed from General Hardee's command. He won't be able to use them because they're going to the center of the battlefield. So this pretty much is what we might call the breaking point. The breaking point between the greater part of the Army that marches to the sound of the guns, the center of the battlefield, and that part of the Army that is stuck on the left, on the west side of the battlefield with General Hardee, and what is he going to do to fulfill his mission? He'll now have the force that I told you he had at the beginning. One brigade of infantry, Hahn's brigade of infantry. Some cavalry battalions, we're going to meet some of them in a minute, and a few artillery batteries, some who come and go, but one, William Ketchum's battery, that stays with him throughout the afternoon. All right, let's head back to the road. We're going to turn back toward our cars. We're going to go straight across Jones Field to the other side of it.
All right, we're headed north again, back into Jones Field.
Cavalry Road leads across a deep ravine that runs to the east of us here, and called Tillman Branch Ravine. And then up to the other side of that ravine is an open field where Union cavalry had their camp. Thus the name Cavalry Field. The road that goes past it is called Cavalry Road. General Hardee, of course, had to cover this area, and he did have Pond's brigade, but believe me, if Pond's brigade, 2,000 to 3,000 men, were all lined up, they would probably go from where we left the field, came into the field down there on the road, to those cannons over there. So that's about as much infantry, heavy fighting foot soldiers that Hardee has to deal with to cover all of this terrain. And he initially, when the battle moves off this way, Pond comes straight out into Jones Field. And General Hardee, when he sees the Federals retreating, across Southern Branch Ravine, he does what any well-trained Napoleonic commander would do when he sees the enemy retreating. He wants to shock them. He wants to shock them and pursue them and keep them going. And so he brings up one of the other regiments, one of the other few regiments he has at his disposal, which is a regiment of Texas Cavalry. The 8th Texas Cavalry, sometimes under the command of Colonel John Wharton. Sometimes they're called Terry's Texas Rangers. Back from Lee. So his brigade was commanded by Colonel Abraham Perry. Colonel Richard Oglesby became a general, was wounded at the Battle of Corinth in 1864, was elected elected governor of Illinois. That's his story. But he gets his name on the monument, but he didn't make it to the battle. Illinois politician. He even made governor without going to prison. Some sort of record in Illinois.
bad walking on it. I don't feel bad for this track. This track is ugly. I feel bad walking on the other side. See, one of the things that we promise you when you come on the anniversary hike, you may have seen it in the advertising material, this is a great opportunity to tour the battlefield with people that know their way around and visit parts of the battlefield where no one ever goes. You might even learn why no one ever goes. So let's wait a minute while we bring up the trail, and then we're going to cross right over, go around, and continue down the road until we get to Glover's Field. Glover Field. Almost nobody ever goes to Glover Field. This is another one of those, here, I promise you a place that nobody ever got to visit, and actually it's very pretty. This is a very nice dramatic reveal when we come out. This is a farm no one ever visits, or a field that no one ever visits. It's called Glover Field. It's called Glover Field and was obtained fairly recently by the National Park Service. And until late in the 20th century, it was a private farm and people lived here and so on. But it is also the site of fighting in the Battle of Shiloh. Now, of course, since the park did not previously own it, so at the time that they put out the tablets and so on, they didn't put any tablets out here to interpret the fighting. But this is as far west as you can get on this battlefield. And again, General Hardee still has to put somebody out here, has to find somebody out here to watch the left flank to make sure that the Yankees don't have somebody to get around the left flank. At the same time, though, we have just about reached the last Union line of resistance. Once the Federals, who have been defeated on this side of Tillman Branch, fall back to the other side of Tillman Branch, they need to guard the Hamburg-Savannah road. They need to guard the road by which they expect the arrival of General Lew Wallace and his division to be marching up. And they will be marching up that Hamburg-Savannah road when they do eventually arrive. By 2:30 in the afternoon, by 3 in the afternoon, they have not yet arrived. So somebody needs to guard that road. So just like certain elements of Pond's brigade were held back to guard the bridge at the Hamburg-Purdy Road, elements of the Union Army were held back all day to guard the Hamburg-Savannah Road and the bridge over Owl Creek and the bridge over Snake Creek, which come together down there in that bottom land. The troops chosen for that job were a specially organized regiment of sharpshooters. Specially organized regiment of sharpshooters called Burge's Sharpshooters, also known as the 14th Missouri Infantry. The funny thing about the 14th Missouri Infantry is that almost none of the men were from Missouri. Now, there's a long story there. We'll make it just about as short as possible. Missouri was a conflicted state. Lots of people with pro-Confederate sympathies, lots of people with pro-Union sympathies. When
the Union, when the national government called for Missouri volunteers, Missouri couldn't necessarily raise enough regiments of Union volunteers to fill their quota. Therefore, they were very happy to have other people come from out of state to join their regiments. Now, there are certain other states that had such an enthusiastic response to the call that they had extra men. There was an entire band of 1,000 men from Columbus, Ohio, that got on trains and went to St. Louis so that they could enlist in the Union Army to become a Missouri regiment, because there was no room left in the Ohio regiments. Of course, within a few months, Ohio would realize they needed a lot more people than they got, but the 13th Missouri Regiment is made up entirely of Ohioans. The 14th Missouri Regiment is made up of specially recruited marksmen, people that had to enlist and then prove that they were more than competent marksmen. And these were all men from, mostly from Illinois, but also men from Wisconsin and men from Michigan, making up this special group, this special regiment called Burge's Sharpshooters. And then they needed to get a spot in the Union Army, so they left the Mississippi River and became the 14th Missouri Regiment. So what we have over there are sharpshooters armed with a special kind of sharpshooter rifle. A very heavy rifle compared to other infantry regiments. And so their job was to guard the road by which Lew Wallace was expected. Late in the afternoon, their commander decided to push them across this deep ravine and up into this field so that they could better protect, put more space between them and what they're protecting, that road. At the same time, General Hardee sent a battalion of Alabama Cavalry, Robert Brewer's battalion of Alabama Cavalry, about 400 men, into this field, again to make sure that he always knew what was happening all the way down there by Owl Creek. And so as the dusk came on, it was getting to be after 4 o'clock, as the dusk came on, Brewer's Alabama Cavalry entered this field from this end, shaken out into a line of battle, at the same time that the 14th Missouri Burge's Sharpshooters came up out of the ravine into this field with their sharpshooter rifles. And seeing the opportunity, seeing the enemy immediately in front of him, Lieutenant Colonel Brewer, I think he's a lieutenant colonel, ordered a charge. And Brewer's battalion charged right across this field, and the sharpshooters fired right into them. It was a fairly short engagement. The sharpshooters fired, emptied a number of saddles. As the mounted Alabamans came up on the sharpshooters, they let go with their shotguns and their pistols, and those of them that had sabers rode right on through, and the sharpshooters fell back into the ravine. The cavalry could not follow into the ravine, so they broke contact and went back to the other side of the field. A small engagement happened on its own in a very remote part of the battlefield. But that was the Battle of Shiloh for those men. That was the Battle of Shiloh for those Alabama troops and those sharpshooters. And both groups left dead out there on that field. And both groups carried their wounded back to where they started. It became the job thereafter of Brewer's Alabama Battalion to watch this field for the rest of the afternoon, and then they would fall back and bivouac and sleep during the night a little further south from here. But this is the westernmost conflict of the Battle of Shiloh. So I brought you to a place where you don't normally get to go to learn about a battle that nobody ever talks about, and it may or may not have made any difference to the outcome of the battle. No, I'll correct that. It didn't make any difference to the outcome of the battle, but they didn't know it. It was worth the lives of those sharpshooters to come across that ravine and keep that road open, because they didn't know what the Confederates had to throw over here. It was worth the lives of those cavalry to come up out of that ravine and into the field and fight those sharpshooters because they didn't know what the Yankees might be trying to send around the western flank of the battlefield. Only we know that there was no threat to either side. It was worth their lives to fight it out on that battlefield to make sure that the western flank of the battlefield was protected. That's for both of those forces. Let's head on back the way we came. To be very famous on other battlefields around the Civil War. And in fact, there, as Mona was saying, there is a tablet over there, we're not going to visit it, saying where Morgan and his squadron were engaged on the first day of the battle. The tablet behind you shows where Pond's brigade ended the battle. So we're not going to spend much time on that tablet, but just know after we finish talking about Pond's brigade, when we talk about Pond's brigade and their attack, after that's done, they retreat from there, they come here, and this is where they bivouac for the night. And they're about a half a mile in front of any other Confederates at all, and they are far in advance of most of the Confederate army, which fell back all the way to the Shiloh church and south of there. Overnight, Pond's brigade were the only Confederate infantry that bivouacked within sight of their enemies. And they were also the only infantry brigade that was in a position to do anything about the Union counterattack on the next morning. That is tomorrow's program, which I'm also leading. So if you want to come and do that, you can do that. Our next stop is right down here. Let's go with that. Again, like I said, Ketchum had 6 guns divided into 3 sections. Here, as the text tells us, 2 of the sections were here. So we had 4 of his guns during the duel here, and 2 of them over there, which is actually quite a smart deployment. He could now fire upon Boughton from 2 different positions, and indeed, Ed Boughton, from this position with 4 of Ketchum's guns here, 2 in the other position, they could concentrate their fire on Boughton, and Ed Boughton had a gift for overstatement, if you will, or a gift for dramatic statement. In fact, in his own memoir, Boughton calls this episode the Great Artillery Duel of Shiloh. It's just 2 batteries shooting at each other. He's not referencing Ruggles' battery of 52 guns at all, or whatever. He's talking about just these 2 little 6-gun batteries fighting each other. He calls it the Great Artillery Duel of Shiloh. But he thought that he was up against 2 or 3 different batteries, but in fact Ketchum had just sent his guys around to different positions so that they could concentrate his fire, and that had a lot of what to do with Ketchum prevailing in that engagement. However, because the artillery is having to be used in this fashion, Hardee has to use the artillery to fill this gap, to try to extend his line all the way to Owl Creek. The other part of Hardee's mission is going to come into play right now, and the lack of artillery is going to help assist in preventing Hardee from fulfilling that mission, and that is keeping touch with the rest of the army. The rest of the infantry is moving to the east, moving toward the center of the battlefield. So from near this position, between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, General Pond moved his brigade up. The infantry was here. The infantry lost contact with the rest of the army that had moved off in that direction, and so General Hardee ordered Pond's brigade down into the ravine to make contact with the rest of the army. So this is the part of the program that I promised you at the beginning. We're going to follow the Louisiana brigade right down into Tillman Branch Ravine and try to follow them in their steps as they do their best to try to fulfill their part of Hardee's mission that he gives him. Okay? So, let's go.
Swimming is where they 18 tons of charge and count together.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do next. When dry, it's pretty easy footing.
It took them 3 days to get back to the unit down.
The Louisiana? Yeah. It is? Yeah, I think that's right, isn't it?
I got an ancestor that enlisted for extra duty on April 11th.
Oh, okay.
I figured he was early.
Yeah. All right. This was easier the other day. See what we got here. I think we have an opportunity here. Let's be very careful. Be good neighbors to each other.
There you go.
As we come down here.
There's the branch.
Yeah, there's a big crossing point here. Yeah, that long move is not so good. That'll lead in the drain.
Not too bad. Get your feet wet.
See, that's a good way to solve the problem.
Oh, it's cold. Nothing already wet.
I'm already soaked, so.
One thing I've noticed the last couple of days, this stuff is the devil. The devil made this for you. But because they're so wet right now, they're pretty tender. And so, I mean, the last couple of days, I've just been blowing through thorn bushes and thorn patches, and I haven't had too much problem with them. One of them is going to catch me, and then I'll be sorry. But so far, this stuff has not been too bad. But there's a lot of it. Okay, our route, once we get across this, let our friends get over here. Come over here in case you need help. But our route will be on this side of this feeder. Here, right here. We tried to do it right here. That we just crossed. Now, across it, there's high ground here and high ground here, but where we are right now is a feeder ravine. So It doesn't have a name or anything like that. It's just this little stream that drains down off of these hills over here. And therefore, with the battle going on the high ground over here, Pond is able to move his brigade across the creek and up this ravine without being seen, without being noticed by the Federals. He still does not have contact with other Confederates on his right, but he's moving forward up this cedar ravine off of William Gray.
I'm sorry about that.
I didn't even know I was making them go. Everyone looked and I went, oh,
Was that out loud?
Send a cloud of skirmishers across the ravine, form here to protect, and then the rest of the men cross in column. So just 4 across and then straight on back like they're on a parade. And then that way, of course, like we did, people in front can help the rest through. And and they had good 4-foot sticks of wood that they could grab and pull each other up with, that kind of thing. But it is necessary for there to be no immediate danger. So, but what would have happened? A few people out, and then skirmishers would have deployed up here. And if there were any Federals out there, skirmishers or whatever, they could push them back while the rest of the folks come back. That's one of the things that's really important, a skill that's really important for these regiments, is deploying from column to line of battle and back very quickly. Because in the event they get caught crossing a feature like this, then the enemy's just going to mow them down. I mean, imagine if they had cannons and you were lined up all the way back. You know, a piece of solid shot would break a half mile of your bones and nothing of it, you know? So that's a very important thing for them to consider, but that's the importance of reconnaissance, the importance of skirmishing, the importance of intelligence, making sure that before you try something like this, you know it's safe to do it. And then hopefully when they do encounter the enemy, deploy the line of battle, zip, do it very quickly and begin firing upon the enemy. And that's one of the judgments a field officer commanding a battalion would have to make. How close can I afford to get to the enemy before I deploy in line of battle? Because I can move fast in column, but I can only fight in line of battle. So how close can we get to the enemy using our speed before we safely deploy and then attack and drive them off? Continue on down here a little bit further.
I'm wearing dark color.
Don't go in there.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, in a situation that was not uncommon at Shiloh and not uncommon in the Civil War, these at this point it was 3 regiments of Louisiana troops: the 18th Louisiana Regiment, the 16th Louisiana Regiment, and the Orleans Guard Battalion from New Orleans, found themselves down here in a peaceful grotto. Immediately about them, all peace and quiet, and then immediately above them, the absolute horror of a raging battle. And here they found themselves with a question: what to do now? We no longer have contact with General Hardee, our boss, who's still up there in Jones Field. We have not yet made contact with the rest of the army, who seem to have gone somewhere over there. and Colonel Pond needed to make a decision. While faced with that decision, a staff officer from General Hardee's staff, Samuel Ferguson, Colonel Samuel Ferguson, came riding up and gave the order, General Hardee wants you to attack that battery on top of the hill. If you attack that battery on top of the hill, you'll get them in the flank and you'll take them. And there was some talk about whether that would be a wise thing to do, some back and forth, and Colonel Pond asked for Ferguson to go back and confirm the order, which means he has to go back now, talk to Hardee on top of the hill, come back and do it. In the meantime, they hold fast down here. Now, I can't tell you exactly the whys or the wherefores of this, but at this time, Colonel Pond is no longer here. He either left this position to go try to find Hardee himself, or he went to do something else, but at a critical point, Colonel Pond was not here. And at that point, Samuel Ferguson returned and said, "You've got to go." General Hardee says, "You've got to go. The clock is ticking and you've got to go." And so the order was from General Hardee through Colonel Ferguson, it's time to make the attack. And so these three Louisiana regiments deployed in this area, down in this ravine, with the 18th Louisiana Regiment under the command of Colonel Alfred Mouton on the left. And I don't think everybody else heard this, but this was an Acadian regiment filled with a lot of people that only spoke French. It's a genuine Acadian regiment under an adored commander, Colonel Mouton. About 500, more than 500 men in a Zouave style regiment. So you can imagine the special uniforms that those Zouaves used to wear, the baggy pants and the colorful tunics. Their tunics,
18th dressed like that?
Yeah,
at
the
this
18th
time?
are Zouaves. Yeah.
Okay.
The 18th, and indeed the tunics of the 18th Louisiana were blue, and that had already created problems this day. Even in a quiet sector, marching around behind the Confederate lines, other Confederates opened fire on them. So a decision was made to go ahead and take the tunics off, turn them inside out. They had white linings, so they put them back on inside out. It was white, which is not the best, but it was better than blue, where your own friends would shoot you. And then the next regiment over, the next battalion over, was the Orleans Guard Battalion, a battalion of elite, leading the sons of the elite of New Orleans. In fact, at the beginning of the war, General P.G.T. Beauregard had joined the Orleans Guard as a private, just for the privilege of saying that he could be a private in this grand regiment. And then Jefferson Davis immediately made him a brigadier general. So he went but he did go from private to general. He just didn't work his way up through the ranks. And then the last regiment was the 16th Louisiana Regiment under Major Daniel Gober. And so the order came to move. However, when they were going to reach the top of the hill, they're going to realize, to their dismay, that they are moving at an angle to the Federals that they are trying to attack. And therefore, the attack is effectively is what is called an echelon. An echelon. The regiment at one end of the line goes first, then the middle regiment goes behind it, and the third regiment goes behind that. It's the effect that they did by trying to attack that way when they're going to find out that the enemy is over here. So the attack is actually happening not in a straight line of battle, but an echelon with the 18th Louisiana on the left and in front, and therefore alone. The Orleans Guards next in line and to the rear, and then finally the 16th Louisiana next in line and to the rear of them. And the order comes to go. General Pond is not here, but these three regiments have to go. So Colonel Mouton
Major Gober, and I can't remember the commander of the Orleans Guard, each on their own, follow me, forward march, up the hill. So, follow me. I got them in right. I got them in the right order. Now here's a tablet that describes what I just told you. The three regiments making their attack en echelon with the left in front, the 18th Louisiana, the Orleans Guard, and the 16th Louisiana. Remember that these tablets represent the center of the line of battle of the unit being interpreted. Therefore, when we think of the 18th Louisiana, think of them shaken out in line of battle, and they would have been further up the ravine than where we started, climbing up the hill in this area, and then passing up through that ravine and over that way. Where we are would be the center of the Orleans Guard battalion, coming up the hill behind the 18th Louisiana, and in the middle, and then behind us on the right, the 16th Louisiana. Now, once they reach the top of the hill, there'd be a bit of a surprise, an unpleasant surprise. The Federals who are over here, the Federal battery that they're supposed to be attacking, is straight up this trail. It's called McCallister's battery, and it was a battery of originally 4, but at this point 3 heavy howitzers, 24-pound howitzers, and they are firing at Confederates that are attacking them from another direction. So the idea was to attack them in the flank. However, the Federal infantry that had been supporting that battery was falling back, and they were falling back along a road that runs from the battery there over to here. And when we get up to that road in a few minutes, you're going to see the monuments of those regiments. But most of the Federals had already fallen back and reorganized and refitted with ammunition at the Hamburg-Savannah Road, which is just on the other side of that. So what's happening is principally the 18th Louisiana is marching into an ambush. They're marching straight across that plateau toward Federals that can fire at them from this direction, while another line of battle is arrayed to their left, firing directly into their left. So the 18th Louisiana is moving right into a very dangerous, very deadly situation. Indeed, they attack full, great elan in that French regiment. They attack straight up there, and they engage in a very bloody fight, and they're outnumbered and being fired at from more than one direction at the same time. While they hold out doing that, the Orleans Guard would pass straight over this and straight up the hill until finally they came up on the right, and again they would have to fight the Federals that were guarding that road. Then finally the 16th Louisiana attacking on the right. Nobody on the left of this brigade, nobody on the right of this brigade. They're all alone out here attacking toward those cannons. While they made that attack, even while they made that attack, they saw the cannoneers of McCallister's battery hook up those cannons to the limbers and head hell for leather down that road behind the Union line of battle that was protecting their retreat. And so the cannons got away. The cannons got away, and in fact the Union line of battle had turned, and all 3 of the regiments were now caught in the ambush, caught in the concentric fire of infantry here and infantry there. And it resulted, after a heroic fight, they must have been on top of this plateau almost half an hour, in a repulse. And all 3 of the regiments fell back into
the feeder valley. The 18th Louisiana suffered the most casualties, as you can imagine. And I don't have the exact number, but I'm going to guess at the exact number. Just know that it's a guess before I tell you. Out of just over 500 men, between 500 and 600 men, they suffered about 218 casualties in this very short fight. They had had very light casualties up to this point in the battle. In this very short fight, they just got shredded. About 218 casualties. And among those casualties, the vast majority, when you look at the killed, wounded, missing in action, the vast majority are listed as missing in action. They went up that hill, they got shot, they had to retreat, and their friends never crossed that ground again. So whatever happened to the casualties that happened on top of that hill, they just disappeared from the Confederate Army. And obviously, if you think about the families back in Acadiana, waiting for word of their loved ones, the best that Colonel Mouton could do, or any of their officers could do, is tell you, he was with us when we went up the hill, and he was gone when we came back. And I'm sorry, that's it. That's all we can tell you. Let's move on up the trail until we get up to Cavalry Road. We're already behind enemy lines. Who would be coming in that direction except the enemy? But they're wearing blue. But nobody else could possibly be there. And they're standing there arguing until the wind picks up and it shows the pelican flag. Louisiana, quick, fire. And indeed, in that case, that battalion of Louisiana troops had the unfortunate experience of, what are you guys doing? We haven't even reached the front line and people are already shooting at us. And indeed, they had run into a lost Yankee regiment behind the Confederate lines and ended up in a separate battle. Our direction is that way. If anybody wants to come back later, there is down that road. Of course, this is the road that the Federals were protecting. This is the line where the Federals were defending against that attack. And if you follow that road down there, you'll see it intersects with a road that goes this way, and along that road were other Federals that were firing into the flank. Also down at the intersection of that road is one of the common graves in which the Confederate dead from the battle were buried. And I can tell you that the only significant engagement that created a large number of Confederate dead in this area was the one that we just talked about. So, you know, if you're thinking about what happened to those missing Acadians, more than likely you'll find them down here at the end of the road. If anybody wants to go over there and check in with them later, of course that's something you can do. Our business is in this direction. Battery that the Louisiana troops were trying to capture, and this is the place whence they left. This battery was also the object of another Confederate unit under Hardee's command, and that is going to be the subject of our next and last stop on our program. But this is a key piece of terrain for General Hardee. These cannon are up here on this high ground shooting across Tillman Branch, causing the Army all sorts of problems as they march toward the center, and General Hardee is trying to do his job of supporting the Army on his right while keeping contact with Owl Creek on his left. So when those Federals retreated across Tillman Branch, covered by the fire of this artillery, someone had to keep that retreat going fast. Taking time. Patience. Patience. Okay, you might recall when we were at the Cavalry Road stop in Jones Field, we found that General Hardee had noticed that with the Federals retreating across Tillman Branch, he wanted to send his cavalry after them to keep on the shock, to keep attacking the rear of the retreating enemy and keep them going. That's Cavalry Road. That's the same road we were standing in. That's the road we're parked on. We're just on the other side of Tillman Branch right now. And so the cavalry regiment he had at his disposal was this 8th Texas Cavalry Regiment. So when a French Beausejour approaches a Prussian artilleryman, he just lets the horse do all the work and can top him very nicely as he rides past the cannon. That's the idea of pursuit. But now, Napoleon had heavy cavalry and he had light cavalry. That's not what the American Civil War armies had. They just had cavalry. But the cavalry might have two missions, either scouting, like light cavalry, or pursuit and shock, like what Napoleon had used for his heavy cavalry. So shock is Wharton's mission. And so Hardee says, chase those retreating Yankees and keep them going. Get in there with your shotguns and your pistols and whatever. If they have sabers, lop those tops right off those Yankees if you can. The idea is to pass right down through Tillman Branch and up the other side. Not in line of battle because this is woods, but everybody concentrated on the road. So they're in a column of attack, like 4 abreast and then heading all the way down. Well, they hit Tillman Branch going pretty good. But you have already crossed Tillman Branch today, and a few other branches down there in those ravines. How do you think a battalion of galloping horses would do covering the same terrain? You probably wouldn't have a good chance of keeping them in order and keeping them galloping at all. So Wharton's galloping, shocking charge became a very careful picking of their way across Tillman Branch. One at a time across Tillman Branch until finally, one at a time, they got out onto the road. Then they put the spurs to the horses and headed up the hill. One at a time, 2 at a time, 3 at a time. Unfortunately, the grand cavalry charge becomes just a trickle of horsemen heading up this road and then across this area right here. And then the tablet's going to explain pretty much what happened to them. The regiment is engaged here at 4. It charged the enemy, was repulsed, and retired to the north of Oglesby's headquarters where it bivouacked for the night. The repulse is because they never got to the top of the hill with the sort of energy that they would be required to carry them through the Union line of battle. And so they got about this far, the men in front got shot down, the men in back stopped. Wharton tried to get them moving. They were not able to get them moving, and finally Wharton ordered all of them to turn around and go back. And so this was the only grand cavalry charge ordered at the Battle of Shiloh. And it was a fizzle. Obviously, I was thinking Brewer's charge that we already talked about. That was a charge against dismounted infantry. But this was, the grand Napoleonic cavalry charge that was ordered, but that is not what was delivered. And they had to turn around and go back the other way.
Was Wharton not an experienced commander? Why did he not hold his troops until they got up the branch?
Yeah, the question was, John Wharton not an experienced commander? He had some experience. He had about a year of experience. I think his mistake came in overconfidence and also the pressure from Hardee to get going. Because even with just a few guys, if the enemy's running and you get them in the back, even just a few guys can do the job for you. But if the enemy provides any resistance at all, then the column is going to stack up, as they did, and eventually the casualties were not too overwhelming. The guys in front had a bad day, but by and large, it was just a fizzle, and they went back the direction they went. At which point, Hardee, as you can see from the tablet, ordered them to fill a hole in that gap up there north of Oglesby's headquarters. That's the same hole that the infantry would fill when they retreated out of Tillman Branch Ravine. All right, let's take one more leg of our walk straight down the road to our cars in the Jones Field.
Cavalry field. Which indeed is where the Louisiana Brigade and the Texas Rangers ended up after their failed attempts to attack on the other side of Tillman Branch. Coming back, as that tablet told us, Wharton deployed north of Oglesby's headquarters. Remember, we met Governor Oglesby, General Governor Oglesby before, and so that's the monument on the other side of the field. Just beyond that is where, after the withdrawal from Tillman Branch, Pond's brigade deployed very far forward on the other side of this field, and that's where they were when the sun went down. That's where they were when the sun went down and the battle ceased. And that's where they stayed all night. Most of the Confederate Army, as I mentioned earlier, retreated and bivouacked far back. Some of them around the Shiloh church area, some of them 5 miles back where they bivouacked the night before. And so on the second day of the battle, they had to march all the way back. There's a car coming over here. And, so the first story on the morning of April 7th on the west side of the battlefield is General Lew Wallace, the Union General Lew Wallace, attacking through Tillman Branch Ravine, and the only Confederates there to face him are Pond's brigade, because they stayed out there all night long. Now, the left flank of the Confederate attack. Did General Hardee achieve his objectives? In some ways he did. He did keep the left flank covered all the way to Owl Creek. He did not keep contact with the rest of the Confederate Army. Whether he could have done so or whether that would have been a good thing, we cannot know in retrospect. We do know that the vast majority of the Confederate infantry all converged on the center of the battlefield and captured what was left of General Prentice's division. We also know that all of the disorganization caused by the vast majority of the Confederate Army forming a circle and engulfing one small detachment of Federals cost them a lot of time, and that they were unable to effectively reorganize and attack Grant's last line of battle. Whether or not they could have ever overcome Grant's last line of battle is very unlikely. 2 brigades tried. and Jackson and Chalmers over there in Dill Branch, and they came back without getting that job done. Over here on the left side of the battlefield, we have rather more an ambiguous situation. We have, for a while, a rather weak Federal presence on the other side of the ravine and a very weak Confederate presence on this side of the ravine. So when the sun goes down, we have two forces facing each other across the ravine, both of which are too weak to do anything to drive the other. There are also two forces that are in a military backwater. The main event has gone somewhere else on the battlefield. So we have all these men sort of facing each other, unable to affect the outcome of the battle. So Hardee generally succeeded in his mission. His mission was not critical to Confederate victory. Not everybody gets to be in the center ring of the big fight. So this also brings to mind another notion that we talked about at the beginning of the program. What are we saying when we look at a quiet part of the battlefield and say nothing happened there? It's the Battle of Shiloh. A lot happened there. Now it's fair to ask, did the activities on this part of the battlefield have a decisive effect on the rest of the battle? And the answer here is no. The battle had simply moved somewhere else. And the fighting that occurred here was of a smaller scale, but no less vicious, no less deadly, and no less important to the people that did the fighting. It was in fact a life and death issue to the people that did the fighting. And whether we're talking about over 200 Louisiana Zouaves that became casualties in this hopeless attack on McCallister's battery, or whether we're talking about half a dozen Alabama cavalrymen who fell in the attack on the Sharpshooters in Glover Field, to them, it's just the same. It's a life and death experience. And those that survived counted themselves lucky to have done so. So that's all of our program on the Confederate left, the neglected flank. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming up. Thanks for sticking with me. This wasn't as bad as they promised.